Welcome to everybody. We're glad you're here. And before we jump into the meeting, let me just point out, obviously Mayor Serge Stadina is not here, so I'm filling in for him as the vice chair. I'd like to update the members and the public on our process for speaking to the committee today. And the primary members will be using their cameras and we will take live public comments. Members are asked to turn on their cameras or raise your hand virtually, or if you can't virtually, visually, raise your hand. And we will call on you for a comment or a question when it's timely. And Anna, would you please go over briefly the procedures for the public to participate today?
Yes, of course. In addition to emailing comments, the public may also provide live comments during today's meeting. In order to provide live comments, you can join today's Zoom meeting through the link or by dialing one of the numbers from your phone that are provided on the cover page of today's meeting agenda. When the public comments are called for on an item, you can click on the Zoom platform, click on the raise hand icon in the Zoom toolbar on the top right of the screen. The vice chair will call on you by the name you provided. If you're participating by telephone, press *9 on your telephone to indicate your desire to speak. The vice chair will call on you by the last 4 digits of your telephone number. Press *6 to unmute. All comments, whether emailed or live, will be made part of today's meeting record.
Thank you for that, Anna. Okay, great. Let's get started with the meeting. And in the words of Serge Stadina, welcome to the most fun organized meeting group that you will ever participate in San Diego. Since we are in a virtual environment, we're not going to do the traditional introductions, but instead I'd like to welcome you all and thank you for joining us. And I did want to call out and especially recognize that we have a new member from the U.S. Navy, Jason Jones. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Welcome, Jason, if you're online to the group. All righty. Then the next item on our agenda is approval of the meeting minutes. And let's see, does anybody have a question or a comment from the membership on the minutes? And if not, Anna, let me know if anybody from the public has indicated they want to speak on the minutes.
I do not see any raised hands, Vice Chair.
All right.
Sankey, move approval.
Motion to approval from Sankey. Is there a second?
LaCava.
LaCava, a second. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, let's have a roll call vote, please.
Okay, great. City of Del Mar, Mayor Dwight Warden.
Yes.
Carlsbad is absent right now. Chula Vista is absent. City of Coronado, Councilmember Sankey.
Sankey, yes.
Thank you. City of Encinitas, Councilmember Hinsey.
Yes.
Thank you. City of National City is absent. City of Oceanside, Deputy Mayor Ryan Kim. Thank you. Yes. City of San Diego, Councilmember LaCava.
Yes.
Thank you. City of Solana Beach, Deputy Mayor Becker. I believe she's absent. Okay. Port of San Diego is absent. U.S. Navy. And my apologies. I'm not sure we have enough voting members.
And did you call them the U.S. Navy? Are they here?
U.S. Navy is absent.
Do you have enough?
U.S. Navy is absent. The Port of San Diego is absent. County of San Diego is also absent.
If we don't have enough people voting, that's okay, as long as we still have enough people in the room for the quorum, I think. Right, Keith?
Yeah, and Shelby Tucker, don't play lawyer on me, but I think that's the correct approach, Mayor.
Okay, so let's mark that down as the vote was unanimous for those who were present and voting, and move on to the next item on the agenda, which is public comments. And this is an opportunity for members of the public to offer a comment on something that is not on the agenda. If you would like to comment on something that is on the agenda, we'll call on you when we get to that item. So let me inquire, Anna, do we have any members of the public that wanted to comment on items not on the agenda?
Yes, Vice Chair Warden, we have Dirk Akema.
All right, Dirk, welcome.
Dirk, you're self-muted.
There you go.
Very good. Good afternoon, Shoreline members. Dirk Akema, member of Save Oceanside Sand. Hey, I'm glad to contribute a few comments about sand. I'm glad that the previous sand ag replenishment efforts are being reviewed in today's meeting. It's pretty exciting to see what really happened back then in 2011. In Oceanside, we believe that sand replenishment should be complemented with sand retention. Efforts to replenish sand on our beaches are expensive and environmentally detrimental. Sand is scarce and increasingly valuable as it becomes more and more scarce. Protecting our beaches with retention actually saves the expense and saves the environment. We encourage everyone to take heart to that. We also believe other cities suffering from sand loss should be looking at retention options themselves to manage public access. Sand loss will continue for all of us, but retention saves replenishment and helps control the loss from storms and currents. We would like cities to work together to support efforts to restore and protect our beaches. All beaches matter, from Oceanside to Imperial Beach. We're all suffering from the same problem, losing our sand and keeping it on the beach. Locally, Carlsbad has dredged their lagoon. Encinitas and Solana Beach will be dredging offshore. Del Mar is getting sand from mitigation settlements. And Oceanside is considering a Newport Beach type solution by installing a few groins with regular replenishment to restore our public beaches. Anyway, that's basically all I have to say. I hope that we can see progress on projects being discussed by this very important panel. Thank you so much, Dwight.
Thank you for your comments, Dirk. We appreciate that very much. Anybody else, Anna, that wanted to make a comment at this point?
No, Vice Chair, that was it.
All right, then before we go to the main business, I think, Anna, you have an announcement for us or some comments that you'd like to make. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Warden. As we are getting through the first quarter of the year, I just wanted to make everyone aware that SANDAG is working on renewing the MOUs with coastal jurisdictions for consultant shoreline monitoring work. The MOUs are set to expire June 30th of this year, so we will be extending the end date to June 30, 2024, and will include costs for fiscal years 23 and 24 of shoreline monitoring. Please send Courtney Pesh and me your point of contact for routing the MOUs. And for our local jurisdiction folks, I wanted to mention that the Coastal Commission has a rolling non-competitive grant for local governments responsible for developing and amending local coastal programs. I will share the link to the grant program in our follow-up email. And lastly, this will be my last working group meeting. Courtney Pesh will be taking over as the staff liaison, and I know she'll be doing an outstanding job. So that's all the announcements I have. Back to you, Mayor Warren.
Thank you, Anna, for that, and thank you for your service to us and to SANDAG. We will miss you. And Courtney, are you on here? I think you are. You want to just say hello? So we welcome you, Courtney, to be the new staff person for us. All right, let's move on to the next item on our agenda is the working group restructuring and draft task force charter discussion, and that's for Keith Greer. So Keith, you're on.
Dwight, I did want to just say something. We were just
Sure.
having a technical difficulties for a moment, but it's wonderful to work with all of you. I can't wait to get work in the next few months and move forward with preserving our shoreline with the most fantastic working group, as mentioned in the beginning.
All right, thank you, Courtney. You sounded like you were in a well, so I was going to leave you alone there. But I'm glad people get to meet you, and we'll look forward to working with you. All right, Keith, restructuring.
All right, thank you, Vice Chair Warden. So you recall your January meeting, I presented the restructuring of the working groups that are occurring at SANDAG. I wanted to give you an update on this effort and start a discussion about a charter for the Shoreline Preservation Task Force. So the restructuring of the working groups came out of an agency-wide initiative to look at the organization's effectiveness. It was kind of embodied into something called an organizational effectiveness plan, and it was adopted in 2019. One of the reasons for the recommendation was because we have 23 working groups at SANDAG, and like a snowball going down a hill, they kept adding working groups and never kind of looking at the ones that we currently have. So each of these working groups takes about 40 staff hours to put together, and each one of them about $1 million of staff time and expenses cost over the year. So there's lots of working groups and analysis that we've done. We've talked to the working group liaisons. We've talked to staff members that sit on the working groups. We've looked at peer review. And out of that came a kind of a common theme. So this isn't applicable to all the working groups, but many were struggling to meet quorum, as you kind of saw today. Some lacked meaningful agenda items. Some were just kind of were so old that they no longer align with the agency's current priorities. So staff developed some recommendations, and at the February 11th meeting, the executive committee approved the recommendations for restructuring of the SANDAG working groups. And that's included as agenda item 4 in your packet. But kind of an upshot, what we did is we said the first thing that has to occur is a standardization of the nomenclature. We have groups at SANDAG, and they consist of working groups or task force, technical advisory committees, subcommittees, councils. So we said, let's go ahead and standardize the nomenclature. We of course have the board of directors, and the board of directors has subcommittees, such as the litter abatement subcommittee or the housing subcommittee. Then we have 6 policy advisory committees. Those are the 6 board members, or excuse me, 6 PACs that are included that are by state law. And for example, Transportation Committee or the Regional Planning Committee are 2 policy advisory committees at SANDAG. Reporting to these PACs are working groups, and they look at broad policies and a suite of issues such as the Transportation Committee will have the Mobility Working Group, and the Mobility Working Group will looking at the policies, projects, and programs related to our Regional Transportation Plan implementation. So there will also be Technical Task Force, or Task Force for short, and those will be focused around specific projects. For example, the Bayshore Bikeways, a working group that should be a task force. Or specific topical areas. We have a working group related to goods movement, really focused, really defined, and those good movements more likely for a task force. So technical task force are exchange of ideas around a technical area or a resource topic, and provides a regional forum and collaboration for that to provide staff input on the latest kind of current technology, what's occurring out in the research world, and just kind of collaboration amongst the members. Implementation of this restructuring will reduce our working groups from 23 to 11. That's kind of shown in a graphic on attachment 1 of your report. It includes 2 new working groups to implement the regional plan, a mobility working group, looking at the transportation network and implementation policies for the regional plan on transportation, and a sustainable community strategy working group, which will be looking at all the policy programs and projects related to our SCS strategy in the regional plan. Staff will also be looking at the spring to evaluate whether various task forces are needed for other working groups that are not currently included in attachment 1. But to jump ahead, we already know that there's a need for have a shoreline preservation task force. And that's why today I'd like to talk to you about the charter, just kind of introduce the charter, what we're thinking, get your feedback on things that we've missed, things we should add, or things we should delete from that charter. And then that'll engage us in the next discussion in terms of later on this summer, we will bring it back to you. To the next slide, Courtney. The draft charter is attachment 3 to your report. The purpose is very direct. It provides technical expertise and background knowledge and cross-agency coordination on regional shoreline issues. The responsibilities identified in the charter are forum for collaboration, coordination, and peer exchange. We look at collaboration on coastal resiliency policies and projects, And examples of those would be like the marine protected areas policy that the state came out with. We bring those to the Shoreline Preservation Working Group and talk about how it could or could not affect regional shoreline issues. We also looked at past projects, such as the Incident's Living Shoreline Project. That's an example of something that we want to take examples of and try to replicate them throughout the region. We promote best practices and technical assistance. You remember last month, Dr. O'Reilly came to talk about the longshore current and how sand is moving in that longshore current, and challenge kind of the traditional science approach in terms of how we think about things and how current science is actually being applied. And finally, the group is there to support our regional beach nourishment efforts, such as the regional beach sand projects 1 and 2. And you'll hear about today from Shelby Tucker and for Anna Van about a possibility for regional beach sand 3 project. And our regional core coastal shoreline monitoring program. That's a program that Greg Heron each year comes and talks about how the sand is currently looking offshore and where is it coming from, where is it going to. Next slide. The proposed membership mirrors your current working group membership. It consists of the coastal and bayfront cities and the County of San Diego, the Port of San Diego, the U.S. Navy, with technical advisors from the Coastal Commission, State Boating and Waterways, State Lands Commission, State Parks, State Fish and Wildlife, National Marine Fisheries, and the U.S. Army Corps. There's also community advisors that will be continue to stay on the task force, the Southern California Coastal Chairmen's Association, nonprofit coastal advisory groups, the fishing community, scientific community, and environmental justice and climate equity community. So there's no changes being proposed. We do want to reach out to the working group members, make sure they still think they should be on the working group or technical task force going forward. And we'll bring that back to you in June. Next slide. Elected officials. So you're a unique working group where you have a large amount of elected officials that are represented here. So we want to make sure that if there's a willingness from elected officials to continue to stay on the task force going forward, we encourage that. The elected officials bring kind of a depth and uniqueness that kind of adds to the technical members on the working group. So we're not proposing any changes, and we leave it kind of broad enough so if the jurisdictions, the coastal jurisdictions and bay jurisdictions want to, they can have the elected officials continue to serve on the task force. The chair of the task force would be selected from a member of the working group, task force for a period of 2 years. The meeting frequency would be every quarter as you're being regularly meeting, or as needed. For example, if we get into another regional beach sand project, we'd meet more frequently. And the duration, all working groups and task force are an annual grouping group, and we review each fiscal year, and we'll continue to meet as long as there's a regional need for the task force. Next slide. So wrapping it all up, what's the next steps? The expectation from the executive committee is that all the restructuring the working groups will be in place by the 1st of July, which is our new fiscal year. So for this group, we want to introduce the idea of the technical task force charter today, have a discussion with the Shoreline Preservation Working Group. We bring back to the item with any revisions in June for finalization of discussions. We'll report back to the executive committee later in June. And then finally, we propose to stand up the first meeting of the technical task force for shoreline preservation at your September, would have been your September working group meeting, will be your task force meeting. That concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions or capture any recommendations that you have now. If you also think about it later on, if something hits you, please email myself or Courtney, and we can include those into your recommendations and bring back the charter in June. That concludes my report. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Keith. And let's see if we have board member questions first, and then we'll take public comment if there is any, and then we'll have a discussion. So I see Kelly Hinsey, your hand is up, you're on.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks for bringing this forward so we have the chance to actually articulate what this committee does and the action that we take. And I just have a comment. It's a small one, but the reason that we had trouble reaching quorum today is because we had a Zoom link that was incorrect in our calendar meeting. So I just want you to know that we don't usually have a problem with reaching quorum here. It's a really engaged group of technical advisors and the elected officials.
Thank you for that, Kelly. Joe.
Thank you, Chair or Vice Chair Warden. Yeah, I find that to be a common problem where the link between being a panelist and the link just to join the meeting often gets confused. So a challenge we continue to face 2 years into the Zoom world. I had a couple of questions. I'm sorry, Keith, remind me, this task force reports to which working group or which committee?
The task force would provide information to staff directly, which would then bring it up to the various policy advisory committees.
Okay. And then has thought been given about to Councilmember Heinz's comment, would this group continue to be a Brown Act group?
So we went back and forth with that with our legal counsel, and that's still an outstanding issue. The way I understand it is because you have so many elected officials on this group, there'll be 11 of them, that you would still need to be a Brown Act meeting. I'll have more clear definition of that for you at the June meeting.
Well, as you heard, this is a pretty engaged group. I've only been on for a couple of meetings, but that makes a big difference in terms of folks are generally more willing to commit when there is a Brown Act and they know quorum needs to be held. On the other hand, Brown Act is not always the most conducive to a task force and how they conduct business and the kinds of conversations you want to have, sometimes on the fly and not necessarily what's on the agenda. So a little bit of a balance. So I look forward to more conversations on that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And Councilmember Hinsey, if we have questions, let's get those out now. But before we get too deep in discussion, let's take the public comment and then we can come back to discussion. So Councilmember Hinsey.
I can save it for the discussion portion.
Okay, thanks. Does anybody else have any more questions from the board members at this point?
Mayor Warden, I've got questions. Bill Sankey.
Yeah, Bill, go ahead.
How are you seeing the difference between a task force and a working group in terms of the functioning at Sandag? I'm looking at the chart and that came with it talks about who reports to who. And it seems to me that the more important groups report directly to a committee who then reports to the board. I'm sorry, I used the wrong adjective, the more important groups, because this is a pretty darn important part of Sandag's work as well. So what's the difference between task force and working group?
Yeah, that's good. Now, first of all, I want to make sure that we understand and to reiterate your point that this is an important group. So we're not diminishing the importance of the group itself. Working groups at large deal with large policy issues that go across the agency. So like the mobility working group, they're going to be looking at things like bikes, they're going to be looking at highways, they're going to be looking at trains, they're going to be looking at implementation of science, broad policy issues across a hard range of areas. Task force are very specific to a project. For example, how do we build the Bayshore Bikeway? Or how do we build the next coastal rail trail? Or alternatively, a technical topic. This is like another technical goods movement example I give you. How do we facilitate goods movement? This shoreline preservation working group, looking at back the last 10 years, there's really no policies that need to be discussed at this working group or have been discussed. They really focus in on a collaboration forum and for an exchange of ideas and technical topics. That by definition in the new nomenclature is a task force. So I don't want to make the current working group members concerned that somehow the work is not important or somehow it won't be filtrated up to the PACs and the board. That will occur. Just the nomenclature that we're using in Sandag is that's a task force that information can get directed to staff to then bring up. So that's the difference, council member, and I hope it helped explain it well.
Oh, crystal clear. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Bill and Keith. A question from me, Keith. Was there a discussion about the working with subcommittees for a group like this that only meets quarterly? It might make some sense to have subcommittees that could meet in between the quarterly meetings. For example, one that could work on marine protection areas or RBSP3 or whatever might be timely. Is that something that we could do if we wanted to?
So I think it would depend on the topic. I think right now you meet quarterly, but you can also meet more often. So if something comes up more often, you can choose to do something like an ad hoc committee to meet more often on a topical issue, or you can choose to meet as a full working group. All that range still exists. Making it a task force, if it's still a Brown Act meeting, you still have the issues of all of that Brown Act issues, but I think we can make that work, and it really depends on the topic going forward.
All right, thanks for that. Any other questions from board members? I'm not seeing any hands. Let me ask Anna, do we have any members of the public that wanted to comment on this topic?
I do not see any hands raised.
All right, if anybody in the public, if you think of something you'd like to say, shoot your hand up and I'll try to get back to you. But all right, so it's open for discussion and Mr. Greer is asking us for feedbacks. This is our opportunity to steer the outline that he presented us a bit if we feel that that needs to happen. So who would like to start with a discussion item or a suggestion? Councilmember Hensy.
Thank you. So in the past, we've talked a lot about Oceanside and their project, and some of that discussion has concerned Camp Pendleton. And I don't think that we have a representative on this committee from Camp Pendleton. Would this be the right time to discuss adding new members?
Good question.
Yeah, and I actually wish the US Navy was here. Camp Pendleton, I understand, is the Marines. And my understanding, the US Navy, the Marines fall from the US Navy, and they should be representing Camp Pendleton as well. But I believe that's still the structure. The US Navy can represent the military in general, not only the port, but also the offshore bases such as Camp Pendleton. We can follow up with the US Navy directly and find out if that's appropriate or if another member of the task force will be required.
Okay, that sounds good, because it sounds like the real technical issue that we need here is to incorporate how sediment from Camp Pendleton plays a part in this bigger project. So somebody that's really site specific and can speak to those questions would be really helpful.
Thank you for that. Deputy Mayor Kheim, you have your hand up. The floor is yours.
Quickly want to thank Councilmember Hensy for that, and I support that. That's going to be one of our big challenges, is to get that sediment from Santa Margarita River flowing down south again. So yeah, someone who is very familiar with the condition north of the Del Mar boat basin would be extremely helpful.
Thank you. Good idea. Other comments, questions? If not, I would, on the membership idea, is it a good idea, or would it just be too complicated to look at a member or representative from Mexico south of the border? We've got a lot of issues between Coronado in particular and the border of, you know what, flowing north, and maybe we could have an ex officio representative or something like that. I don't know. Keith, was that talked about, or what are your thoughts?
That's a good topic that hasn't been discussed yet. Let me talk to our borders group and see if they have some recommendations for us.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
as a Borders Committee member, I'll jump in. We have the Consul General as a member and on our committee, ex officio, I believe it might be. And we get participation from them quite often. So somebody, maybe not necessarily the Consul General, but a participant from the Consul's office here in San Diego would probably be a great idea. I know we as a Borders Committee, we talked about doing a meeting in Mexico and struggled with the Brown Act violations that would occur if we had our meeting where the public actually couldn't attend. So some of that cross-border stuff might be easier to do coming north as opposed to going south. But I think certainly participation as a coastal element of our region, because we look at our region as the Cali Baja region, is a good suggestion. Thank you very much.
All right. Other comments, thoughts? If not, let me just postulate this, Keith, and correct me if I'm off base. If I distill this down, it seems like we're changing our name, but we're really not changing our membership. We're not changing how we do things. We still will discuss and be an information clearinghouse. We don't make decisions, but when we feel it's appropriate, we can make recommendations up to the ladder to the people that do make the decisions. But it's really kind of a cosmetic change for us.
I think for this working group, that's an accurate statement. We have other working groups that more changes would occur to.
All right. Anybody else want a final thought on this topic? All right, then Keith, please take those comments into consideration and pass it on up the ladder. And let's see. We don't have no public member has put their hand up, so we're going to move on to the next item. And that is the Regional Beach Sand Project discussion. And I think that's Anna. Is that back to you?
Yes, Vice Chair Warden, before we move on to item 5, I'd like to say that we have quorum for the vote on adopting the meeting minutes. So we'd like to redo the vote if that's okay with you.
Sure. Please call the roll.
City of Imperial Beach is absent. City of Del Mar, Mayor Dwight Warden.
Yes.
Thank you. City of Carlsbad, Councilmember Priya Bhat Patel.
Yes.
Thank you. City of Chula Vista is absent. City of Coronado, Councilmember Sankey.
Sankey, yes.
Thank you. City of Encinitas, Councilmember Hensy.
Yes.
Thank you. City of National City is absent. City of Oceanside, Deputy Mayor Keim.
Yes.
Thank you. City of San Diego, Councilmember LaCava.
Yes.
Thank you. City of Solana Beach is absent. County of San Diego is absent. Port of San Diego is absent. And U.S. Navy is absent. So the item passes with members present.
Thank you very much for for doing that, Anna, and making sure that we get the record correctly. All right, so it's back to you and Shelby, I believe, for regional beach sand update. So take it away, please.
Thank you. Courtney, can you please pull up the meeting slides, please? While Courtney's pulling those up, I'd like to thank everyone for participating today. Shelby and I are excited to present to the working group on the history of Regional Beach Sand Project number 2 and the path to the next project. With that, I'll turn it over to Shelby.
Hi, everyone. Shelby Tucker, and I was the project manager for the 2012 project. I left the agency around 2018 and have been doing a little work as a contract employee. So Keith and the beach sand team or Shoreline team asked me to come on and give a little update on what we did back in 2012. It's nice to see some familiar faces. Okay, next slide. Okay, so for RBSP2, it was approximately 1.4 million cubic yards of sand. Action occurred between September and December of 2012. And the original beach sand project in 2001 was, I believe, 2.1 million cubic yards of sand. And that project included all of the region's coastal cities. This project was downscaled a little bit, changed slightly. And so the cities that are participants were Oceanside, Carlsbad, Encinitas, Solana Beach, and Imperial Beach. Next slide. So this slide just gives you a timeline of what we did and how we did it. So in 2005, we began the process of obtaining funding, and that began at the Shoreline Preservation Working Group level. And just back in the beginning stages of the project, we had a staff working group as well. So all of the coastal cities, we would meet on a regular basis and talk about sort of the goals of the group and how we were going to implement what the working group wanted to do. And so when we embarked on a second beach sand project, we started to meet up and discuss things like, you know, what we were going to build and where we were going to do it, and, you know, how we were going to get the money, and when we were going to go to councils. So there were a lot of beginning steps that we took sort of in the background to try and sort of troubleshoot the biggest thing, which was the money. So the first phase was to do a feasibility study and an economic analysis of the success of the project, potential success of the project. And the reason for this is that at the time, the funding from the California Department of Boating and Waterways, I believe it was the Harbors and Beach Restoration Fund, required a positive ratio in your cost benefit analysis. So we used Phil King from San Francisco to look at the economic benefits of every grain of sand that you put on the beach. And that all was put together in a feasibility study. And we built basically on the success of the 2001 project. So we used the same footprints primarily and the same borrow sites primarily in determining whether this could be feasible. And then we did get approval from Department of Boating and Waterways, and that was in approximately 2008. And an important part of that was that we didn't receive all of the money at one time. We received the money in 3 different fiscal years. So it was divided into 6.5 million for 3 years. So that was our funding source. And then it was an 85-15 split. So 85% from boating and waterways and 15 from the coastal cities. I should also say that the feasibility study and economic analysis was funded by the coastal cities that were interested in participating. So that was upfront money that was put up to, like, in good faith to move the project forward. Then as we moved through, we went into the planning and design phase and preliminary engineering. There are many pieces of that puzzle, but again, we looked at shifting sites north and south, different borrow site options. We did look at going up off of Camp Pendleton. We engaged with the Army or the Marine Corps to see if there was a potential source of sand right off the base. And I think that there potentially was, but the time frame for what we were trying to accomplish with the project and for going through the process of working with them was a little bit longer. They didn't match up, so that wasn't going to be a successful path. And then the borrow pits that we used, we did see that there was enough sand to cover what we were going to need when we did an investigation offshore. So we kind of got what we needed, but that's definitely something in hearing the desire to maybe get more in contact with people at the base, that would be something that could be useful in the future. We got into the environmental and permitting. There were a lot of things that were challenging. The grunion and the lobster seasons, there were a lot of constraints. I had hoped that maybe some of the project team on the consultant side would be on the meeting today, because they can talk in long detail about all of that side of the house. But we had quite a few constraints. However, the resource side of things, some of the monitoring that we had to do for the 2001 project, because it was a success and because we didn't have impacts, we didn't have to do the same level of resource monitoring. So that was a real positive. We did have to do the beach monitoring. The project implementation had been planned for 2011. And when we went out to bid, one of the challenges was that at the time, the dredge was off the East Coast, or most dredges operate not on the West Coast. So we went out to bid, and the price to get the dredge to come over to California was expensive, and the overall project costs went up significantly. So when the bids came in, we had to go back to the coastal cities and sort of massage the project. We lost a receiver site. We got more money, more funding from participating cities. Encinitas and Carlsbad in particular. I believe Oceanside also contributed some additional funds, but I believe it was Encinitas and Carlsbad that put up the most. And then we also, I guess I should have mentioned this earlier, but we also increased the amount of sand that was put on Imperial Beach. Back during that time, there was the potential for an Army Corps of Engineers project in Imperial Beach. And I guess, for lack of a better way of saying it, wasn't sure that it was going to be successful. So we put the resources earmarked for that project into this project, because we had already planned on mobilizing a dredge. We placed additional sand on the beach in Imperial Beach. I think that ended up being about 400,000 cubic yards of sand. So all in all, we were complete around December of 2012. We did have to do additional shoreline monitoring, and that was for approximately 4 years. And we did get a challenge with some of the stuff that happened in Imperial Beach. There was a lawsuit that was filed related to the project and some damage to homes. And so that was part of the project as well. But all in all, we were completed with the project around 2017. And total project cost was about 28.5 million. Let's see, next slide. So just to talk a little bit more about the funding sources, the primary source I mentioned was Department of Boating and Waterways. It could not have been done without the contributions from the coastal cities. The Beach Sand Mitigation Fund from the Coastal Commission, I know that's something that is still collected today. There is some money in there. I did check. There's some funding in there still available for some of the cities. If you don't know your total, I think staff would be happy to get it to you. But we used that money because that money is earmarked specifically for beach nourishment. There's also a preservation fund that has beach nourishment as one of the options for use of the funds. And then there was a grant from the Federal Minerals Management Coastal Impact Assistance Program at the state level. The money, I believe, flowed from the feds to the state, and it was related to minerals management and I think offshore oil. I'd have to go back and look at all the details. It's kind of an old thought for me at the moment, but that was a very small amount of money. I want to say it was about $120,000. The next slide. So those were the funds that we did get. These are the types of funds that we tried for. So I believe on the local level, the developer incentives, and we talked at the time about a Transnet quality of life measure being an opportunity for funding. At the state level, we did apply for Prop 84, Coastal Conservancy, Ocean Protection Council. We sort of had a concept of, let's throw anything out there that we could possibly find and see if we could get funding. We did have some Army Corps of Engineer hope, but that didn't pan out, NOAA. So just wanted to show that there were other things that were available at the time that just didn't work out for us, either because we weren't the right fit or because the project timeline didn't work. Next slide. There you go, Anna.
Thank you, Shelby. And as Shelby laid out the path through RBSP2, I'm going to kind of lay out the long and winding road to RBSP3. So it begins with the feasibility study and offshore borrow site analysis. This study is important because it will build on the existing regional efforts, such as the previous regional beach sand projects and the sea level rise vulnerability assessments and adaptation plans that our coastal cities developed. This study will determine the appropriate sites for beach sand replenishment in the region, estimate the appropriate quantity of sand for each site, and prepare the benefit cost analyses for several regional project options. And this is to evaluate a variety of replenishment sites and different sand quantities. This sets the project up for success in future project phases, including developing the alternatives that can be analyzed during the CEQA review process and provide decision makers like yourselves with key information to determine the economic effects of the alternatives. This will ultimately lead to the preferred project approach, and that will inform the design efforts in the next phase, the environmental clearance, permitting, and design phases. And of course, before we get to the actual construction, as Shelby discussed, there are multiple stages of planning, environmental, and engineering work that's required. And once we're able to jump through those hurdles, then we'll finally move to project implementation and any monitoring work that's required by the permits. Next slide, Courtney. So I wanted to kind of share briefly, since funding is such a big component of making the project happen. Every year since 2019, Sarah Pierce, my predecessor, has pursued funding for the feasibility study and offshore site analysis through various grant programs. So this included the Caltrans planning grants, adaptation planning. She had requested $210,000 for that, and the second round of Caltrans planning grant for sustainable communities, and $215,000 was requested for that. And in the next year, under Prop 68, the Coastal Resilience Grant Fund through the Ocean Protection Council, we had requested $302,000, and The year after that, through the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, we had requested $300,000. And all these grants, we ended up not receiving money for. Next slide, Courtney. Thank you. So there are various funding sources out there available, and it'll take time and effort for us to actively pursue these opportunities. Funding to mitigate for climate disasters and risks have been hot topics at the federal and state level lately. So potential federal sources that we've looked at could be FEMA, which funds projects that promote community resilience and can mitigate any disasters and hazards. Another option could be the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. I know it didn't work before, but maybe there's a different appetite today. And if we're having the military involved, then maybe the U.S. Navy can. There's such a huge military population and naval bases here in San Diego, so that's another potential avenue. At the state level, we've contacted the California Division of Boating and Waterways through their Public Beach Restoration Fund. So there's funding set aside for public beach restoration projects, and they open up their applications typically in December. So it would be an active process of us going after these grant applications. Another option through the state would be the California Office of Emergency Services. They have community resilience as one of their main priorities. And then there's different Senate bills as well. So SB1, the Atkins bill, also had appropriations for Ocean Protection Council to issue funding for resilience. So if we collectively advocate for funding, this could be a path that we can explore at the state level. And local level, Shelby touched on this, but the Coastal Commission funds, the Beach Sand Mitigation Fund, that's another opportunity for us to pursue funding. So with that, I wanted to close it, and we're here to take any questions and discussion.
Thank you very much, Anna and Shelby. Let's see if we have board member questions, and then we'll take public comment, and then we'll have discussion. So if a board member has a question, please put up your real or your virtual hand and I will call on you. I'm not seeing anyone, but if you think of something, shoot your hand up. How about any public speakers on the line, Anna, that wanted to make a comment?
Yes, Vice Chair, we have Dirk Akima and then Lynn Gilson.
Okay, and Julia, I see your hand is up too, and Ryan, we'll get to you. So Dirk, if you would like to speak, please go ahead.
Thank you for recognizing me, and thank you for the presentation. It's interesting to see the whole funding process of it. Although I tell you what, I was really interested to see what the monitoring results were of both projects. Up in Oceanside, I know in 2012 we saw a great amount of sand. It was phenomenal what happened virtually overnight with the whole dredging and sand replenishment effort. Although I will tell you, within 3 years, all that sand was gone. So I'm very curious to hear about the monitoring efforts and to see, I guess whether the project was viewed as a success. I mean, $28 million is a lot of money to spend and have it disappear within 3 years' time. So I'm wondering, where the sand ended up, if other areas were able to hang on to their sand any longer than the short period that we had it there in Oceanside. So I'm wondering if there might be some comments that can be made about the monitoring. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Dirk. And Keith, correct me if I'm wrong, but we do get annual reports on the monitoring and the follow-up and that evaluate the success of these programs. And those are available on the SANDAG website. So Dirk, I would encourage you to follow up with that. All right, Julia Chun here, you're up next, and then Deputy Mayor Kime.
Thanks, Mayor Warden. Julia Chen here with Coastal Consulting, and I just wanted to remind everyone how surf monitoring was a requirement of the CDP last time. And for RBSB2, Surfrider actually conducted that surf monitoring. So now with some more advanced notice, I would just ask the committee to make sure that we have, proper baseline data for surf monitoring and allocate sufficient funding. So just kind of wanted to bring that to your attention. And then there's lots of options now because there's so much technology out there. In addition, while you're at it, it'd be interesting to get some beach use data as well, especially as beaches are a cool zone in the face of climate change and whatnot, that there could be some really innovative monitoring done around this project.
Thank you, Julia. Deputy Mayor Kime.
Thank you, Mayor Warden. Obviously, not sure if you've heard, but we have a sand problem in Oceanside. So again, we'd be very supportive of starting. I think this would actually be, I know a smaller subcommittees were discussed, and if there was something we could do to get cities on board and commit funding as soon as possible, so maybe we can shorten the timeline up from, we're looking at the last one from 05, 06 to final completion of the project 6 years later. It'd be nice if we could shrink that timeline a little bit, just by being more efficient communicators and collaborating more closely or frequently. We can, I think you're gonna have strong support unanimously across our council for a replenishment project. Obviously retention has different challenges, but I think we can all support replenishment right now.
Thank you for that comment. I think it's a good idea. Dr. Flick, welcome.
Yeah, hi, thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's good to be back. Two things. First, about the monitoring. The Coastal Frontiers monitoring is meant to do relatively few surveys over the whole entire San Diego region. And those surveys are very valuable. However, there's been much more intense, much more frequent, and much denser surveys done by Scripps over the same, almost the same amount of time. But those surveys were limited to Imperial Beach and Torrey Pines, Solana Beach, Encinitas, and let's see, there was one more, I forget. Anyway, with the price of gas, we didn't quite make it up to Oceanside. The Scripps monitoring didn't cover Oceanside. If you contact me, whoever is interested in those results, a lot of that stuff is available on the web. A lot of it is in publications that, so they're fairly readable. It's not quite as technically as, as you might think. And the short answer is, though, that in the second sandag renourishment, the sand lasted a lot longer in most places, including Torrey Pines and Encinitas, as I recall, because the average grain size was bigger. One of the problems in the in the RS regional sand nourishment #1 was that the sand was a little bit too fine. And so, and I think also the coincidence of storms right after the nourishment didn't help either. Then there's this whole big question about retention. I sent an editorial to the union that luckily they didn't publish it this morning. Otherwise, you might not like me anymore. But I have a lot of thoughts on retention. I've done a lot of work on that at San Onofre and other places that, in a nutshell, essentially proves to a high degree of certainty that nourishment with retention keeps beaches wider in Southern California than they would otherwise be. And that makes it much more economical and much more long lasting. Ultimately, of course, with sea level rise of 2 feet or more by 2100, eventually we will have to retreat from the coast, but that's decades away yet. So in the meantime, sand retention and sand nourishment, if we want to keep sand on the beaches, and that's an honest question. Whether we want to keep sand on the beaches or not is really the first discussion and decision that needs to be made. But if we do, retention and nourishment go hand in hand, but you have to make certain commitments to keeping the groin fields, for example, full, so that the down coast and even the up coast, the adjacent beaches don't get starved there. Now, you know, it's in the editorial, so, you know, Marco, please don't throw things at me when you read it. Thanks for the opportunity to talk.
All right, thanks for your comments, Ron. You're always welcome here. Shelby.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to go back and mention, I should have mentioned that in our, I think it's in the phase 1 report, Chris Webb can tell me if my memory's out of whack, but we did explore retention. We were hoping to do an offshore reef at the time. I believe we explored groins and other retention options, and I'm hoping that all those documents are still on the Sandag website, but if anybody felt like some midnight reading, I'm sure we could make them available to you. But we just ended up being constrained, I think, in the end with what we could do feasibly with the amount of money that we thought we could get and the project timeline. You know, as was mentioned, it did take us quite a bit of time to get from the thought to do it to the implementation of it. And I think we thought, oh, it'll be pretty easy because we're just going to build upon the success of the 2001 project. And in a lot of ways, there were things that were streamlined because of that. But then there were other things that had changed along the way. And it was so expensive to do anything innovative at that time, such as an offshore reef. So it was determined to get the project built and to do our best to do that in a expeditious fashion. So for what it's worth.
All right, thank you, Shelby. Chris, did you want to respond to that about the documentation? Is it still available?
Absolutely. And nice to see everybody, the gang's back together. And Shelby's right. It was evaluated and looked at. And part of the reasoning for not going down that road was because it was potentially going to add a lot of controversy of the project. And I think there were desire to do a successful project, demonstrate it can be done with good coarse grain sand, see how long it lasts, and then add another feature later to another version of this RVSP3. So the documentation should be available with Sandag. We can also provide documentation as the consulting team that did the work. And if there's any other questions on the prior project, you know, I could be a resource to answer those too. Sorry, I was late to join.
Oh, you're welcome whenever you can get here. Thanks for that, Chris. And let me ask Keith, do we have a place on the Shoreline Working Group website that collects all this information as a one-stop shop for people that are interested?
Yes, we do. We can point people to that location of the Sandag website.
Okay, great. So anybody out there, if you're interested in this topic, there's tons to read. Check out that website and you can access the best info we have. Ron, I see your hand is up either again or still, but if you have something further to say, you're on.
Yeah, thanks very much. First of all, I wasn't listed as one of the advisors, but I'm the new Scripps Institution of Oceanography representative. For those of you that don't know, I used to work for Boating and Waterways and then Parks and Recreation, but I'm retired since 2020 from the state. I'm still active at Scripps, and so Margaret Lynan thought I'd be a good choice. So you can take it up with her if you don't think that's true. Secondly, Shelby, nice to see you again. You know, my comments were in no way meant to be a criticism of the first two nourishment programs. I mean, that was a fine effort, and we should do it again. But we seriously should consider retention structures, not including offshore breakwaters. Those are a terrible idea for lots of different reasons. But we know for a fact that groins work. The only question is whether they're acceptable, you know, politically and recreationally and socially. So let's see, that's about it. Thanks very much.
All right, thank you, Ron. Keith, you have your hand up. The floor is yours.
So you've seen that we, for the past about 3+ years, Sarah Pierce and now Anna Van and I have been putting in for applications. And I'll tell you that our applications mostly have been denied. At Caltrans, we had an opportunity to ask them why. And the perception is that Caltrans, at least some of the other grounding agencies, perceive the sand as transitory. They feel that $28 million to put on the beach and it goes away. And we've explained to them that the sand goes offshore, it's available to put back on the beach, and in some cases it goes back and forth from being offshore and onshore. But there's this big perception out there, at least from the grant perspective, that the money is not well spent in terms of putting sand on the beach and having it stay there. That said, the two things that we are proposing to do this next year is to re-engage the boating and waterways. Remember that 85% of the money came from regional plans 2 came from boating and waterways. And right now that member on your group is at vacant. So we want to put that member in, have them engaged so that if we do decide to go to the Regional Beach Sand 3 project, we have open pipeline to that potential source of funds. The other thing we do is we are still throwing out the idea, and I'm glad there's some interest in there. Is it time to do what we did in Regional Beach Sand 2 project, to have the local jurisdictions put up the money for the feasibility and economic study? That would be some good put money up front, do the feasibility, do the economic, that makes us more able to attract funds. If you want to have a subcommittee meeting or a full committee meeting between now and June, I'd love to have that conversation, gauge the interest from local jurisdictions, and see $20,000 each. We could do a lot of work to get us further along. So I'll put it out there. The other thing I want to explore, and this is more for Sandag internally, is there ability and the willingness to do something to streamline the environmental review so that we're not having to do another EIR for another project that's already been done twice before. I know that streamlining environmental review is a very touchy subject for some people, but I think then if done right, we can tear off the past environmental documents and get a little bit more cost savings for the whole project. So that's right now where I think Sandag staff sits, is what's the willingness to kind of move forward? Should we continue with grants? Or is there a willingness to kind of upfront this feasibility and economic analysis study money with local funds? And then what can we do in addition to that to make ourselves more attractive to a regional beach sand project?
Thank you for that, Keith. Deputy Mayor Kime.
I'm very supportive of local funding, and especially if it's a start of $20,000. I'm more than willing to take a council agenda item forward sooner rather than later and get the ball rolling.
Thank you for that. Julia.
I have a feeling this idea is not going to be very popular, but since all the coastal cities are on here, I thought I'd throw it out here anyways. But there's also the geologic hazard assessment district. So maybe if each of the coastal cities started gathering some of those funds from their residents, we would have this pot of money and not have to rely on grants, since it's something we foresee being needed in the future.
Thank you for that comment. Councilmember Hinsey.
Yeah, just wanted to weigh in to join Councilmember Kime and say that we too would be supportive of a regional project. We are looking forward to the 50-year sand replenishment from Army Corps, but that will only cover south of Beacons. So we're interested in finding more sediment for northern portion of Encinitas.
Thank you for that. Keith, back to you.
I'm sorry, I didn't lower my hand, but since you gave me the floor, I will speak to it.
Please.
If this interest is a topic of this interest to everybody, we can set up a meeting for April and to continue on with the conversations and put some more parameters on cost.
Yes, please do that. I'm not seeing any other hands. Let me ask a couple of questions in the form of comments and for reaction. One of the interesting things over the last 20 years or so is most of the money that's come for beach sand replenishment came as a byproduct of other projects. The Bataquitos Lagoon restoration was not designed to put sand on the beach, but it did. Same with the San Dieguito Lagoon restoration, which was almost $100 million. And most recently, the San Elijo that Sandag and Caltrans did to the tune of more than $100 million and put sand on the beach. So I'm kind of scratching my head how that kind of scenario fits into the funding program. And I just want to be reassured we're not missing something by just asking the federal and state agencies for money, but to parlay these kind of things. And is it reasonable to expect there are going to be more of these kind of projects where we should be making a strong push for mitigation in the form of beach sand replenishment for those kind of projects? So Keith, if you have thoughts on that, I'd love to hear them.
Sure, and I'll speak bluntly for the committee. The whole past mitigation projects, you get winners and losers. You've got a lot of winners in terms of the city of Encinitas and Solana Beach from the San Elijo project. You get city of Del Mar from the San Dieguito project, but city of Oceanside, there's no big lagoon restoration up there. The city of Carlsbad hasn't really benefited. City of Imperial Beach hasn't benefited. So I think if you wait for mitigation, you're going to get haphazard or at least opportunistic sand. We have a whole opportunistic sand program. Right now, the I-5 program is pulling sand off of, or doing some work that has sand, and they're working with the city of Encinitas to put sand on D Street, which is a wonderful thing, but it's hit or miss. It's not a regional approach for a regional issue. I think Dr. Flick had it right, which is there a desire to put sand on the beach, and what's the most efficient way of doing that? And those are the questions we need to address and answer going forward.
All right, thanks, Keith. I have one other financing question, and this is an idea that's percolated in my head for a long time, so I'll float it again. And that is part of the reason that we have a sand budget deficit on our beaches is because we blocked all the rivers with dams over the decades in ignorance or with not bad intentions, but that's been the result. Would it make sense to impose some sort of a surcharge on countywide water bills as a way to get people who are using the water that comes from that system to help participate in fixing the beach problem, which is really a problem that benefits everybody in the county, not just the coastal cities? Thoughts on that? And Ron, I see your hand is up if you'd like to comment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think some of us have been saying that for many decades. And it's not just water supply, which obviously we need. I mean, we need those dams. Removing the dams, except for these small ones that got removed in Malibu and places recently that were full of sediment, but removing Lake Hodges Dam, it's ludicrous. We can't do that because of water supply, but also flood control. There's a lot of flood control dams, not as many in San Diego as there are in LA, but in Southern California in general. I think that's absolutely a sensible idea. I realize water costs more than most people want to pay, especially with the rates going up in San Diego. But it is a cost. One of the costs of water should be the replenishment of the sand. And as far as the opportunistic sand goes, I think Keith has it absolutely right that in San Diego, at least in central part of San Diego, outside of Silver Strand and Santa Monica Bay, for example, those beaches are wide precisely because of all of the projects that were done, the dredging of San Diego Bay after World War II, the creation of sewage treatment plants and power plants and airport dredging and Marina del Rey construction. That's what made the Santa Monica beaches what they are today. The Baywatch beaches, where it's almost too wide because it takes forever to get from the parking lot to the water. We don't have that kind of geology. We don't have, and we certainly don't want to dredge out all of our lagoons and make small craft harbors. As much as I'm a boater, yeah, I'd love to see that, but no, that's crazy. We don't want to do that. It's just out of the question to have enough of the kind of sand that we need for the beaches on a regular basis from those kind of projects, where the sand would be a byproduct. Just not reasonable in San Diego.
All right, thanks for that, Ron. Councilmember Hensy, back to you.
Thanks. So just to add, and I don't know if Sandag might already know this, but we are doing so much environmental study with our 50-year sand replenishment project with the Army Corps that probably a lot of that data we'd be able to share with Sandag to supplement some of the environmental studies. And perhaps that would result in significant cost savings.
Thank you for that. Good suggestion. Anybody else? Ron, your hand's still up. Did you want to add something else? Ron, you're muted, so I can see you talking, but can't hear you.
Sorry, forgot
There you
to
go.
lower my hand. Thanks.
Chair Warden, there are 2 members of the public with raised hands.
All right, let's go ahead and call on them. Can you do that, Anna? I can't
Yes.
see who they are, actually.
Yeah, so Lynn Gilson.
Yeah, hi. I did have a comment for Dirk, and earlier commenter, that asking about some of the data that followed up on the earlier sand replenishment projects. And there have been a couple of presentations through this group that I think have been excellent. And if he goes back about a year, I think there was one that the data suggested that these projects should be done every 10 years. And, that means we would be doing it literally right now. So again, by an estimate, we're about 10 years behind or 7 years behind. And so I'm really excited to hear people's ideas about how to speed up this process.
Thank you for that, Lynn. And Anna, do we have other public speakers?
Yes, the next person is Henry Matheson.
Henry, you're on. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. How are you? I
Excellent.
have just two quick questions on the $28.5 million. Is it publicly available in terms of how that was allocated among the, the planning process, the important administrative costs versus the actual dredging and distribution of the sand? And then secondly, what's the best way to think about the unit economics in today's dollars? So simplistically, for every $10 million, how much sand gets distributed regionally, not just in one specific area? And by the way, I'm just a homeowner in Oceanside, so I've been watching this for a very, very long time. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. And I think the answer to your first question is yes, but I'll pass it to Keith if he wanted to comment on that question.
Yeah, for the specifics, we can grab that data and put it into the various categories. It's out there, it's available. We just haven't done it in a long time. And we could even escalate that up to today's dollars using a CPI. I recall that one of the biggest costs was just mobilization and demobilization of the dredge. Getting it here through the Panama Canal or getting it here, from the East Coast was a big issue. And there was even talk back then about buying our own dredge for San Diego County, but that hasn't gone anywhere. Shelby, do you have anything to add? I know you lived and breathed this for years.
Yeah, no, you're right, Keith. The biggest cost was the dredge. So, but yes, those numbers exist. So I think Keith and the team can, it's probably still on the website somewhere. So Keith and the team can get it to the group, but definitely
right.
the dredge cost was the number one.
Thanks for that. I knew we could count on Keith to dredge up that old issue. Sorry, I can't help myself. Anybody else have a comment they'd like to make at this point? If not, let me try and summarize the consensus that I'm hearing is the working group is still very much committed and RBSP3 is a good idea. We're all in support of that. Regional solution is the way to go. That we would like to have an agenda item at our next meeting to take a look at local contributions to start raising some money, as Keith suggested. And number three, that we're open to considering setting up a subcommittee or two if that could help to work on specific aspects of the problems, maybe Oceanside situation or something like that. Anything else?
Vice Chair, I'll just add one thing. I think your next meeting is in June. I think we should do
Yes.
this item in April. I'd like to get on this a little bit sooner, have a meeting in April of the committee and talk about this a little bit further.
Absolutely. I think we would all be in support of that. Anybody that isn't, speak up. But in order for us to get this done, it's going to require a consistent, sustained, ongoing effort over a lot of time. And the only way to do it is one bite and one swallow at a time. So let's take the next one in April. Last chance for comments from anyone. Let me see, what else do we have on the agenda? The upcoming meetings. So we're going to have one in April, and then we'll have one in June as well. Closing comments. Thanks to everybody for participating, for members of the public for participating. Check the Sandag website for information about all these topics, and we'll see you next time. Thanks again.
Thanks, White. We'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Let me get something, I'll talk to you about Shoreline.